Thank you. Good morning, everyone. The first time I explained a clinician what we were thinking, this idea of the virtual physiological human, he looked at me like, this guy is crazy. It was 2005. I wouldn't believe that 12 years after I would discuss this in a corporate event, an industrial event, as a standard industrial practice, emerging, but very concrete and mature. It's fascinating. If you think about medicine, it's all about predicting. A doctor has a patient in front of her who shows certain sign, and she needs to decide what is the best course of treatment. How does she? Well, she relies on the knowledge she has accumulated over the years, but probably more important, she taps into past experience of her own and of her peers that observed that other groups of patients who showed similar sign when treated in a certain way got better. And she predicted that there is a similarity, and she used this similarity to establish the best course of action. And this is a prediction because we don't know whether this is the right way. Only time will tell us. Now, this historically always happened with not enough information. In fact, medical professionals are trained to take difficult decisions with not all the information they would need. So it is a bit of a paradox that nowadays medical professionals are experiencing an information overflow. Medical imaging, genomic and post-genomic, the automation of laboratory testing, and the enormous development of biomedical instrumentation is producing an enormous amount of quantitative data that the doctors struggle to use at the best. Some years ago, a group of visionaries started to think about the possibility of using modeling and simulation to collect all this data about an individual patient and use them to predict things that were clinically relevant, that the doctor could use to support his decision. We realized immediately that before we could do this, we had to develop a framework of methods and technologies that at that time didn't exist. And we gave to this framework the name of virtual physiological human. The term was coined in 2005, although to be fair, it was heavily inspired by a pre-existing initiative, the Physiom project led by Peter Hunter, Jim Bassett-With, and others. But where the Physiom project was about using modeling and simulation to describe the physiology of human body, from the very beginning, the VPH vision was about healthcare. The idea was to use model to support the medical decision, to improve care. In 2007, we published the first research roadmap. 200 experts from all over the world contributed to this document called Seeding the Europhysium, where we suggested a direction, where we had to go in order to make this vision a reality. The community around this research vision grew very quickly, also thanks to some substantial funding, research funding that was mobilized by the European Commission around this idea. And in 2010, we established the Virtual Physiological Human Institute, an international not-for-profit organization that coordinates this research community worldwide. And in 2014, the first FDA-approved virtual human technology was introduced in the market, the Hearth Law. So it's been an amazing journey. And this corresponds to an explosion of this research community. This is the number of papers on subject-specific modeling that were published every year in PubMed, which is the most important indexing service for medical journals. And as you can see, starting from around 2005, there is really an exponential growth. It is the same motivation that drove us to establish in 2012 in Sheffield, UK, the Insignio Institute for In Silico Medicine that with this 140 strong academics is probably the largest research institute in silico medicine in Europe today. Insignio is a joint collaboration of the University of Sheffield and of the Sheffield Teaching Hospital NHS Foundation Trust. So from the very beginning, the idea was to develop technology that would translate in the clinical practice. Now, let me show you some of the technology that we have developed in this first 5 years of activity in Insignio. I won't go in any detail because the time is scarce, but I'm happy to discuss with any of you over a coffee if you're interested in more details. Julian Gann and Paul Morris developed a technology called VirtuArt. A lot of people who have cardiac problems, in reality, have something called coronary stenosis. This is a narrowing of one or more blood vessels, those vessels that wrap the heart, that are coronaries. And because of this narrowing, not enough blood reached the heart, and so the heart stopped pumping properly, okay? And eventually you could have a heart attack. There are many ways you can treat a patient with coronary stenosis, but to choose which way is the best for that patient, there is a consensus in the cardiology community that there is one information that is very useful, and it's called fractional flow reserve. It's a measurement that you perform by inserting an instrumented probe through the femoral artery up into the heart through the stenosis. So it is risky, it is expensive, and it requires instrumentation that is available only in few hospitals. As a result, today in UK, only a few % of patients with coronary stenosis are actually evaluated with an FFR, in spite being this recognized the best standard of care. So, what if we can take the standard biplanar fluoroscopy images that we're using to actually make the diagnosis of coronary stenosis, images that today are really the only way the doctor tried to guess what is the best course of action, and instead use them to build a subject-specific model that can actually predict the FFR non-invasively. So instead of sticking this probe into the patient, just from the images and a subject-specific model, we can return the doctor the measurement that is so important to take the clinical diagnosis. This is a technology that now is being tested over 200 patients, is incredibly accurate, better than 90% in predicting the actual measured FFR. But once you're here, and this is typical of modeling, once you're in a place, then the next step is very easy. Now we can actually simulate different treatment options. So for example, patients that have more than one stenosis, in silico, we can try to put a stent, a virtual stent, and see which one of the lesions should be treated first to get the best cardiac output. This old lady, she feels fine. But then she has a small accident, she falls, and she breaks her hip. But the fall was very mild, which it should not have produced a fracture. That's because this lady has osteoporosis. This is a silent disease. You don't know you have osteoporosis. You're fine until one of your bones fractures, okay? Aging is always associated with a progressive loss of bone and muscle mass. But in this subject, this loss becomes very fast and becomes pathological. Today, the standard of care is this. If you are suspected to be at risk of osteoporosis for a number of reasons, you are subjected to this examination, which is called bone densitometry, which essentially measures how much bone you have in your skeleton. And from this information, we try to decide who is at risk and who is not. This diagram below is a bit complicated, but essentially what it means is that half of the patients who have osteoporotic fracture are not osteoporotic, which doesn't make sense. Well, it does. The problem is that our way to define the risk is not sufficiently accurate, okay? Almost 20 years ago, it was suggested that we could use a computed tomography to generate a subject-specific model of the bone of interest and predict its actual strength, and from that, have a much more reliable predictor. It sounded easy, it was not. It took us a very long time, but today we have a reliable technology in Sheffield called the CT2S technology that has been proved to be 15% more accurate than the standard of care in osteopenic patients, so in the patients who are more difficult to diagnose. And when this technology is widely adopted, just with this improve in the diagnosis, we have projected that Europe could save more than 200 million per year of direct cost and avoid over 7,000 hip fractures. Incidentally, 1 elder out of 4 who experience a hip fracture will die within 12 months for related complications. So by avoiding hip fracture, you also avoid premature death in the elders. We know everything about bone mechanics. It's being investigated for many, many years. And the way we do is it's quite simple. From body donor program, we harvest bone from cadaver, and then we measure the mechanical property of these bones. Small problem. Nobody donates children body. So we know everything about adult bone. We know nothing about children bones' mechanical properties. A child comes in the emergency with a fracture, say an infant, 2 years old, and the carer, the mother, say, well, yeah, he broke this bone in this way. If you're a pediatric radiologist, you have 5 minutes to decide if the story is consistent with the fracture. Because if it is not, there are 2 possibilities. The child has a silent disease like osteogenesis imperfecta that was not diagnosticated and will create further and further situations like this. Or the child is being subject to abuse. It's a very difficult decision, especially because we don't have a clue of what is the force required to break an infant bone. So in Sheffield, we had this idea. We started to perform, of course, with the permission of the parents, post-mortem CT scans to infants who died for cause that did not produce skeletal abnormality. And then we use our in silico technologies to actually estimate the strength of the bone of these children and create a normality table that will start to advise pediatricians that in order to break in torsion a tibia of a 2-year child, you need a certain amount of force. Okay? We just submitted the first paper which provides this information for the femur, but this is a 5-year project where we will eventually map the entire skeleton. Staying in pediatrics, juvenile idiopathic arthritis is a bit of a mystery disease. It is an inflammatory arthritis, it's non-rheumatoid, and for those of you who are not in medicine, idiopathic means I don't know where it comes from, okay? So it means that it affects children and adolescents, and I don't know where it comes from, and it's not rheumatic. That's the only thing I know. And it's incredibly heterogeneous. Some children show this disease. We give them a little treatment, they get better very quickly. And some other are very resistant, and it needs very, very aggressive therapy before they start to get any better. In the MD Pedigree European project, we're using subject-specific model to investigate whether the biomechanical subject-specific determinants can explain this heterogeneity in the disease. But it is not only about digital patient. There are other 2 scenarios that are emerging that I think are relevant here. Enrico Dall'Ara is working in using exactly the same type of imaging modeling technologies, but on mice. The goal is to reduce, refine, and partially replace animal experimentation. By using virtual patient technology on animal model, we are actually able to reduce in bone drag testing the number of animals required up to 60%. But we think that there's a lot more that could be done here, and we hope this is an area that will develop. But it's not only about preclinical. Patient-specific modeling is starting to make a difference also in clinical trials. But I don't want to spoil the surprise of the next speaker, so I'll leave Adriano to explain you what is this all about. Thank you very much. you.